You're watching Backbench Drivers. I'm your host, John Lawson. And joining me here this week, I have the one and only Professor Eric Louw joining us to discuss some topics which I think will be relevant to Australia today, even though a lot of what we'll be talking about takes place in the not so distant past, specifically in South Africa. South Africa has sort of stood out as a example of what might happen if our side of politics, that being the Australian nationalists and also around the world, other various Western countries' nationalist causes fail and don't end up succeeding in re-entering into power. And that is, it could end up in the fractured and basically completely dysfunctional state that South Africa finds itself in, being the epitome of a multiracial, dysfunctional society, basically. So we'll be diving into that a lot today. I wanted to get Eric on because I saw his. It's not as recent anymore, but his podcast that he did with Dr. Frank Salter from the British Australian community, and it was a fascinating series of podcasts that you guys did together. So it's great to have you on, Eric. Thank you for joining us.
All good, all good.
So, before too far into it, could you just give me a little bit of background in terms of what your involvement has been in politics? And I know that you underwent quite the ideological shift, I think, when you were a little bit younger. Could you dive into that a little bit, please?
Yeah, okay. Well, in my youth, when I was young and naive and idealistic, I went to university, and as happens with so many people that went to university, I became a lefty. So at university, I was a left wing activist. That was at the time when the anti apartheid struggle was going on, and I ended up working for and becoming an activist for the what was called the United Democratic Front, which was the internal wing of the ANC. So I became a lefty activist fighting against apartheid. Um, well, how does the change come? Gee, it was an iterative process. I don't suppose it's going to be helpful to go into it. Let's just say that I saw the light, okay, and I decided that I had been wrong. Um, I, and I suppose also I've watched what happened in South Africa, and I've watched what happened in Zimbabwe. I also lived in Zimbabwe as a child, so I'm interested in both of those societies, and watching what a left wing government did to both was shocking. And so I moved to the right, and have been moving to the right for a number of decades. So that's pretty much my background, I guess.
And when you came to Australia, were you heavily involved in politics over here, or has your connection with the BAC been your main conduit for
Yeah,
that?
that's been the only I didn't really get involved in politics here. Um, I was a migrant. I mean, other than voting for Tweedledum or Tweedledee, there didn't seem to be anything else. And so it's only quite recently that I became involved, in fact, with the BAC.
Yeah, very nice. I think a lot of people only sort of discovered the BAC recently when they really stepped up their game in terms of producing really highly polished content. So I guess that's you, me, and many others that have found the BAC to be amazing representatives of our worldview. So yeah, no, it's great that you got in touch with Dr. Salter as well. I was saying to him, it's a real commendation of the work that he's done, that he's able to attract so many university intellectuals to the cause. Basically, I mean, for the longest time, nationalism has sort of languished as a low class or trashy kind of ideology, at least in the eyes of the mainstream, because of its association with political hooligans, basically. And so I think that the BAC striking such a tone that it does in terms of trying to, maintain the highest levels of evidence in all the claims that it makes, and by really pitching things at an academic level, that they've managed to attract professors, yourself, Stephen McKinney, and various others. I mean, Salter himself has a PhD, so. Yeah, that's just a short aside. I won't go too far into that, but yeah, no, it's amazing to see the BAC really growing and stepping up its game in terms of its defense of the interests of white people in Australia.
Yep.
Now, I suppose that leads into our first topic. I'll let you. Did you have something to say to that, Eric?
No, no, I'm just agreeing. I think it's also part of a. I mean, I think there's a zeitgeist shift going on. After 1945, it became, well. Let's just say that after 1945, nationalism and right wing causes were systematically demonized. It became very difficult to be right wing or a nationalist. And you just never heard nationalism. You never heard nationalist arguments. And I think there's a zeitgeist shift going on. I think it's across the globe. You see people are waking up, and the old 1945 consensus is breaking down. Thank goodness.
Yes, absolutely. And I suppose we'll jump into the main reason why I had you on, which is to discuss what happens when a population's nationalism or expression, self-expression in politics, which is, nationalism, is denied them, which is the example of the mainly the Afrikaners in South Africa. Could you give us a little bit of background on just a very brief history on the story of South Africa in general, and then more specifically the situation with the main white populations within South Africa?
Okay, where does one start? I guess it's um, okay. Well, South Africa went through a nationalist phase. So in 1948, a nationalist government was in fact what was elected. I'll give you roughly what their argument was. Um, Up until then, South Africa had been run by, I suppose you'd call them conservative liberals. But what they had done is the conservative liberals in South Africa were trying to build an economy based upon cheap labor, cheap black labor, if you like. And South Africa was a very underpopulated place. South Africa is like Australia. It's mostly desert. It's very dry. Didn't have a lot of people in it. And so these guys that were setting up the mining industry decided, well, where can we find this labor that we want? Um, and they decided to import lots of black guys into the country. Literally millions of black guys were imported. It's a little bit like the mass migration you see going on right now into Europe and into America and into Australia. And if you ask them why they're doing it, they'll say, well, we need the labor. That's that argument. So that is what had been going on. During the Second World War in South Africa, this process sped up dramatically, largely for two reasons. One was South African white guys, so the South African working class, if you like, were being sent to war in North Africa to fight against Rommel. And at the very moment when you were exporting your white working class to go and fight up in the north, the British were relocating their armaments manufacturing to places like Australia and Canada and South Africa. So factories were growing at the time when your working class was getting smaller. And what happened is that the government at the time just threw the doors open and said, just let black guys pour in, basically. And over a very short space of time, South African cities visibly went very black because they imported huge numbers of these guys from all over Africa. When the white working class guys came back from the war, they kind of looked at this and went, my gosh, what's happened to our country? I mean, we left a place that didn't look like this. So there was a lot of unhappiness. The National Party was an Afrikaner nationalist party in the country who for years had been saying, um, they were saying the British Empire is going to destroy our country by turning it into a black country, by importing large numbers of black people. Now you can see it's true. Look what's happened. There it is. As a result of this, they put up the policy which they called apartheid, And essentially, what the National Party said goes something like this. They said the British Empire throws together people who do not belong together. So South Africa was a creation of the British Empire. They drew the boundaries. They created the political system. They created the economy. They brought these black laborers in. And so the National Party said, going to lose our country. We're literally going to lose our country to black people if this carries on. We've got to reverse the flow. And so that's what apartheid was. So they said, look, we can only see one solution here. And the solution is vote for us. We will take control of this country. And what we're going to do when we have the country is we're going to break it up into 11 separate ethnic states. So they identified what they said were 10 black nations in the country, Zulus and Xhosas and Pedi and so on. So they said there are 10 black nations, and we will create countries for them. They will have their own countries. We will give them independence. And the idea is that once they have their independence, they will lose their South African citizenship. Hence, we will not have to give them the vote in our country. Because if we give all black people the vote in our country, it becomes a black country, we lose our country. So the only way to overcome that is break the country up into 11 separate countries, give black people their independence, and what will be left of South Africa after this process has happened will be a demographically, whites will be the majority in that state, so we won't lose our country. That was the basic model of apartheid. Um, Now, there was a lot of resistance to that, and the resistance didn't only come from black people. Amongst the people who put up the greatest resistance to this were white liberals, white businessmen, because what the National Party was doing was it was going to take their cheap black labor away from them. They hated that idea. What are you doing? Don't break up the country. Don't take my cheap labor away from me. So they put up enormous resistance, which, by the way, included talking to their Anglo cousins in Australia and in America and in Britain, and spreading pretty horrendous stories about apartheid. It was presented as something evil, basically. And so you then saw virtually the whole world, including the whole Anglo world, led by the Americans, say this apartheid thing is unacceptable. We're not going to accept this stuff. It's got to go away. And so there was a lot of pressure put on the nationalist government in South Africa. So they had resistance, obviously, from black people inside the country who didn't want to go back to the places they came from, and resistance from the rest of the world, including the Anglo world, saying we're not going to let you get on. We're not going to let you do this stuff. This is bad. Um, Okay, so eventually you have an anti-apartheid movement grow. You have resistance. You have the Soviet Union get involved, and they started to fund an armed struggle because so now the ANC had military assistance from the Soviet Union. Um, and eventually, it reached the point when the National Party government in 1990 decided that they were going to try something else, and they were going to try and negotiate a new constitution that would end apartheid but would not hand the country over to black people. So that brings us to basically that was de Klerk. De Klerk tried to negotiate that in the 1990s, basically, and that failed. It failed basically because okay, during the course of the negotiations, it's a very complex period. I won't give you the whole story, but the crucial moment in all this was that the American government, which was then a Democrat government, they intervened, and they did two things. First of all, they forced de Klerk to fire a whole lot of his generals who they said were too right wing and dangerous and going to pull off a coup d'état, and he did. He fired a lot of his military guys, so that kind of demobilized the state. And then the second thing that happened is um, the National Party was winning the negotiations for the first half of the negotiations. Negotiations went on for 4 years. For the first 2 years, the National Party was winning. They were trying to implement a kind of government they called consociational democracy. It's a bit like the closest you can say it comes to is it's a bit like Switzerland, okay? And each canton has its own ethnic government, and then you confederate all those ethnic governments into one government. That was the model they were trying to come up with in the 1990s. Um, at a certain point, the American ambassador stepped in and said, "Not acceptable to us. Sorry, that's not what we want. We want you to do it the way we do it. We Americans know how to do democracy. Democracy means it means elections, means everybody gets the vote in one country, and so it's one person, one vote. And we want it to be a democracy of the kind we have, where there's two political parties who vie for power, and that's the model we want. And this other stuff of yours is too complex. No, we're not going to let that happen." And so they actually sided with the model the ANC wanted, and that's what we ended up getting. So that's roughly a summary of what happened.
My internet connection's a little bit weak, so I don't know if I caught all of that. But one thread I did notice running throughout the whole story was the reoccurring appearance of white liberals. Basically, you have the white liberals, which were they had a big say in the founding of the system at the beginning, the apartheid system, but also in its dismantling, and
Hmm.
also from the British as well, in the pressure that they placed on South Africa to reform. So, I mean, this is also the case all throughout the continent. You had the same sort of liberal pressures coming from America, which also put a lot of pressure onto Rhodesia to decolonize as well. And I'm sure there are many other examples
Oh,
that
yeah,
go
absolutely.
alongside those.
Yeah, I mean, it was the
Now,
Americans wanted
why do you think this
decolonization.
is a persistent thing, Eric? Why do you think that why do you think white liberals are so self-destructive in the goals that they pursue? I mean, clearly them and their descendants have been disadvantaged in South Africa by the policies that they advocated.
Yeah. Okay. Well. Okay. The liberals were of course, they owned the economy. Overwhelmingly, the economy was owned by Anglo businessmen who were liberals. Um, and basically, what they wanted was cheap labor. They wanted the labor to be as cheap as they could possibly get it. Now, so and of course, it's not unlike the model we see in Europe today. I mean, in Europe, they are importing huge numbers of people who are not Europeans. And if you ask them why, they'll say, because we need the labor. We have to have this labor. And what they mean is, if you don't have this labor, the price of labor will go up, and we're not going to be too delighted with that. I mean, I think that was the basic reason that that was the reason the conservative liberals did it. The left liberals did it just because they're globalists and they believe in they think it's a great idea to mix us all up and to have multiculturalism, so that we, all a big happy ethnic mix. So you got two different reasons. Left liberals believe in racial mixing, they believe in um, multiculturalism, etc. Conservative liberals, they want it because they want cheap labor. That's just two different reasons.
So basically, I find that's a very similar case here, where you have the white liberals in Australia are really notorious in terms of their focus on issues which are so peripheral to the issues that are really concerning Australians, and especially white Australians. Specifically, you'll find that they are neurotic. They're very concerned to the stage of neurosis about the extinction that might occur as a result of climate change, for example. But they have very little concern, or even, they actually are supportive of policies which will see the eventual extinction of their own groups, such as mass multicultural immigration, and basically other other policies and cultural attitudes within Australia which devalue their own group and their own heritage. It's a twisted sort of thing. I know Jared Taylor, Professor Jared Taylor, who's a doctor, he describes it as a pathological altruism, which is really common, for example, for some reason, especially throughout Anglos, but just Europeans in the post-war post-war era, where we are so altruistic towards these out groups that it actually comes back to damage our own in group. Do you have any thoughts on that, or do you think that there may be another element, another another reason, for example, outside influence. You could say maybe from the US, you could perhaps say from hostile minorities within the country, outside of the ethnic group, the Anglo ethnic group. What do you think? What do you think is the core driver, or do you think it's a mix of things?
Yeah, look, it's we've arrived at this point through a whole bunch of, uh, well, for me, they're unfortunate developments since the Second World War. Um, I mean, I can give you four reasons that I think we've arrived at this point. I mean, firstly, had what I earlier called it the post 1945 consensus, and the post 1945 consensus, pretty much on the liberal side of things, was that um, nationalism was a bad thing. All nationalism was a bad thing, and the reason for them nationalism was a bad thing is that it was like, for them, this meant the Nazis are going to come back. And that was just a complete no no. So if anybody said anything conservative, anything right wing, anything nationalist, that automatically made you a Nazi. You were unacceptable. That was not okay. And we saw, there was a book that was actually published called The Authoritarian Personality by a bunch of neo Marxists. Adorno was the main guy. And the authoritarian personality basically said prejudice is bad, and we have to educate people. This is in America, of course. They actually wanted to educate people in America not to be prejudiced, and they put huge energy into an education program to stop people from being prejudiced. So I think that was one of the reasons it happened. Secondly, if you look from 1950 onwards, UNESCO ran a campaign um, trying to prove that race does not exist. Now, in the beginning, a whole lot of other academics, anthropologists said, "You're crazy, of course race exists." But they won the argument. I mean, it's as bizarre as that. They, over a period of, like, I suppose, 15 to 20 years, they won the argument. And you hear it all the time now. It's now taken as a matter of truth that race does not exist. Um, so if you take the idea that prejudice is bad and we must educate people not to be prejudiced, and race doesn't exist, that gives you the kind of foundation idea that underpins what the Americans now have come to believe. And then, of course, that led into the civil rights movement in America. So the civil rights movement produces. There's a guy called Kaufman who's written a great book called Taboo, and he said that from the 1960s on, early 60s onwards, Americans have this great guilt about slavery. And liberals have taught all Americans to have this incredible guilt about slavery. And now they kind of like, well, oh my God, we did terrible things to black people. We must be apologetic. We must fix all this, whatever that means. Okay. Um, and then, of course, you had in 1964, they brought in the new Immigration Act, which was based on this civil rights thing, which got rid of the national origins quota. So if you put those four things together I've been talking about, you basically end up with this this consensus in the West, which the liberals have taught everyone, because they've now taught it in the schools, they've taught it in the universities. It's widespread. People believe this stuff now, and so they now have come to believe that anybody who is right wing, anybody who's a nationalist, is completely unacceptable, and you must be punished basically. And people are too embarrassed to want to do that now, so they've adopted this liberalism of like, I accept my guilt. I accept that we Western guys are awful. We're bad racists. We had colonialism and imperialism. We hurt lots of people, and oh my God, we should all be so sorry. And apparently, we must now self-flagellate. And part of that means that we must not try to protect our own nation. Our own nation. The very idea that you should protect your own nation is now a completely unacceptable idea to these people. And to even suggest it is crazy for them. And so what they've done is they've gone into this liberal space of, I'm permanently apologetic, and I will bring the whole of the third world into my country to water down my nation, because that's the right moral thing to do now. to apologize for this bad past that apparently we have. I mean, that's the kind of ideology they now believe in.
What many have noted is that the self-destructive tendencies are so powerful, it seems, in our group, that there are even white liberals still remaining in South Africa today, even after all of the collapse and decay that has come from implementing their own policies that they believe in and they advocate. Their entire worldview was uh, was basically turned upside down, and yet it hasn't, in their mind, debunked it. So it's definitely a powerful virus, I suppose, but it's one that hopefully, I guess, through changing hearts and minds, we can eventually overcome, and we can return to a more realistic view of reality. That's all it is. You don't necessarily have to attach a label to it, but to recognize that different groups are different and that they have different interests is really all that is required
Yep.
to start to think in a more realistic way about the world.
Yep. I mean, I think if you look at a lot of liberals in South Africa, um, I think they've realized there are a lot of liberals in South Africa now who will go, "Oops, we got that wrong." Okay, I don't think they've all stuck with it. I mean, yes, there are those that have. Um, I think that a lot of the liberals in South Africa who've stuck with their liberalism are sticking with it because they trapped. They literally trapped. They are businessmen. They have their own businesses. They can't get their money out because the rand has collapsed. They can never move anywhere else and take their lifestyle with them. And so they kind of trapped there, and they've got to convince themselves that it'll all come right. I mean, that's what they've convinced themselves. That somehow this will all work out okay one day. Um, but as I say, I think a lot of liberals, well, a lot of those liberals now live in Australia. I mean, they all left. They came here, and they voted with their feet. And if they voted with their feet, that indicates that they must have seen something went wrong.
Yeah, of course. And there is also, you mentioned earlier, the influence of the cultural Marxists, they're often labeled as. For
Yep.
example, Theodore Adorno and his
Mm.
authoritarian personality. We have to keep in mind that this intellectual class, is not necessarily, well, is not of the ethnic group over which they wish to spread their ideas.
Yep.
These people were Jewish, and they were highly influenced by their minority status and their feelings of, I suppose, powerlessness
Exclusion. Yep.
in the
Yep.
face
Yep.
of a
They felt
homogenous
excluded
society
and they came
sometimes.
people back. Mm. Oh, no, I agree. And you see, one of the great catastrophes is that these ideas got into the universities where they were. I mean, they came in from the 60s onwards, and by the 70s, they were getting stronger. By the 80s, they were pretty dominant in large tracts of the universities. Um, and then in America, what has happened, I think, since about the year 2000 onwards, is that you've had, well, in my opinion, it's a truly catastrophic fusion of neo-Marxism and liberalism. I mean, I would never have thought you could actually merge liberalism and Marxism because they disagreed with each other enough not to do that. But actually, since about 2000, 2010, liberals and neo Marxists in American universities have pretty much got onto the same team. And I mean, the ideology they produced is this ideology we now call woke. Now, woke is not Marxist and it's not liberal. It's some curious amalgam of both of those. And it's incredibly powerful because what has happened is this fusion of Marxism and liberalism that's produced wokeness. Wokeness seems to be especially it's liberals catch that contagion. They can catch that virus very easily. Liberals, a lot of liberals would have resisted the Marxist stuff for a long time. They don't seem to be able to resist the woke stuff as easily because the woke stuff just sounds more comfortable. Liberals are comfortable with woke. It's liberal enough that they go, yeah, that sounds fine to me. And that's what we're facing. We're facing an ideology now that is incredibly powerful amongst liberals. Um, so yeah, and that's the Anglo world because wokeness is just everywhere now.
Yeah, and yeah, all that being said, I think we should also move on to, uh, I think another important lesson that we can glean from South Africa and its history, which is the not just the ideological complications that are involved or the cultural complications, but the actual physical results of this radical mixing of different groups and the devaluing of those which actually propped up the economy and the society. So you have a case in South Africa today where the minority of actually economically productive people within the country, which are overwhelmingly white and either that they're Anglo or they're Dutch descendant,
Yep.
are being attacked on their farms and killed in large numbers by resentful various minority groups from they're either native or they were they were part of one of the waves of migrants that came over. Maybe you could shine some light on the actual the specific people attacking, but that's not the only case. You also have a breakdown in infrastructure on a mass scale. You have some of the highest crime rates in the world, and that's really just the beginning. If you dig into it, you'll find the societal breakdown goes so much deeper than just these most glaring effects. We we often hear in Western countries in our nationalist circles that this is something these consequences can also arrive on our shores if we're not cautious and we follow a similar path that is mass multiracialism like occurred in South Africa. Is this a realistic diagnosis, Eric, or are people overreacting?
Okay. Well, we'll go back to the South African part first, and then to where we are here. Um, okay. When the ANC took over the country, they introduced what we have in South Africa now is something very close to anarchy. You don't really have a government that governs. Um, the ANC are over. I think the bulk of the ANC people would be Marxist. Curiously, it's almost a good thing that they are incompetent and cannot govern, because if they had been a competent government and had actually implemented the Marxism they wanted to, it would have been even worse than it is now. Believe it or not. I mean, you would literally have had full scale Marxism. They haven't been able to implement that. What they have implemented is they've passed a whole bunch of laws called BEE, Black Economic Empowerment. And Black Economic Empowerment, in a nutshell, says it's an idea that you white guys stole the land from us. You white guys stole everything. You're bad. You this colonialism thing. It's all evil, and you should apologize and you should give it all back to us because it's ours. Africa's for black people, not for white people. That's pretty much what they say. Black economic empowerment is a series of laws which set massive quotas, which say all the managers should be black. 80% of the economy should be black people. White guys shouldn't have jobs because why should you have the jobs when it's a black continent? So you must give the jobs to us. So they bring in quotas to force. Well, first of all, they did it in the government. The government itself transformed all the bureaucracy of the government, the military, the police, the bureaucrats, everybody. They just fired the white guys and brought black guys in. They did that very quickly. In fact, it was amazingly quickly. It took them about 6 years, basically just blacken the entire government services. Then, when they did that, they then turned to the business sector and said, now it's your turn. And here are the BEE laws, which means here are the quotas. You have got to get rid of your white managers and appoint black managers, and here's the quota. And if you don't, we double your tax. So we punish you badly. You've also got to employ black guys at the bottom, at every level in the company. 85% of your staff should be black, and just get rid of these white guys. And any company that doesn't do it is punished. Um, a lot of white guys, especially white males, white women could get a job on the woman ticket because they had the same woke thing that They had a lot of feminism as well. So white women can get a job because they're women. White men can't get a job because you're a man and you're white. So a lot of white men went, well, what do I do now? I'm buggered. And what they then did is they started setting up their own companies. What else could you do? So people who previously had worked for some other company, or they'd worked for the government, or they'd been a policeman or whatever it was, went off and started finding a way to set up their own little companies to make a living, however they could. And it turned out a lot of them could do that. They ended up setting up their own companies. A lot of these companies flourished. And in the beginning, they were making money and look, hey, this is okay. So in the beginning, they were going, oh, well, okay then. What did the ANC government do? They're Marxist. They go, oh, no, 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 no. You can't, white guys can't have money. And so the BEE laws were extended. And now what happens is that if you're a white guy and you set up your own little company, even a little company, it can be the local convenience store down the road, okay, or whatever it is. They then say, where are your black shareholders? 80% of your shareholding has to be given to black people. You must just give whatever it is, and the quotas change every year. Every year they up the amount. So I don't quite know what it is at the moment, but basically you have to give. You just have to go and find black shareholders and give them your company. So you do the work, you make the money, but you must give your profits to somebody else. In fact, that was what Elon Musk has just had that in with the ANC now, because the ANC came to him and they said, "We want you to bring Starlink to South Africa," and he said, "Why would I do such a thing? Are you crazy? I'm not going to bring my company to South Africa because if I do, I've got to have black shareholders, which means I've got to give away my profits to a black guy just because he's a black guy. I'm not going to do that." So okay, so that's how they transformed. That was the way the ANC changed everything and took control of the economy, took control of the wealth for themselves. But now the problem is they're incompetent. There are not enough black guys with the competence and with the education to run the economy or to run the government. So once they took over these things, they literally broke everything. It was extraordinary to watch it happen. And it hasn't just been in South Africa that's happened. This has happened in every African country. Wherever black guys took over a country in Africa, it took about 20 years. It's an amazing thing. It was always 20 years. For the first 20 years, things carry on working. It's kind of like a machine. You know, if you've got a huge steam engine and it's going chug, 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 it carries on working for a long time, but just from the momentum of the machine keeps rolling. And it seems that when you take over a country, it takes 20 years for the machine to stop working. And in every African country, for 20 years, it broke down a little bit at a time, small little incremental changes. But after 20 years, suddenly there was a massive catastrophic breakdown in every country in Africa. And that's when you saw it kind of went. Water was usually the first thing that broke down. Water and sewage just stopped working. So your water, they don't deliver water to your house anymore. The machine breaks down. The sewage breaks down, and so all the rivers get polluted, which means health collapses because you're spreading diseases into all the rivers in the country. Then electricity breaks down. Then the railways break down. Then the roads break down. And one by one, every sector just stops working. The government breaks down and stops delivering services. The hospitals break down. And so South Africa's now reached that stage. It started roughly 20 years after they took over. And now we're getting to what's, I think, 26 years now. And the last 6 years have just been catastrophic because this breakdown has produced a complete and utter breakdown of the society. Um, I mean, you literally cannot have, sometimes you don't have water and electricity at the same time. You never quite know when you're going to have electricity. For days, you might go without it. Um, the most frightening thing is that because they took over the police and the military, they broke those as well. So when they broke down when the military broke down, they couldn't protect their own borders. They lost control of their own borders. And so if you think Europe has a migration problem, you want to go and see the migration problem South Africa now has. Black guys are pouring into South Africa from every African country. millions and millions of black people. And these are peasants. These are people without any skills. They're not going to help anybody's economy. They can't work because they're black peasants. They're pouring into the country and inundating the cities. That's produced a different kind of a breakdown. The police don't work. The police simply are unable to function like a normal police service. So there is no police service. So in fact, one of the largest growth areas in the country is private security. If you have a problem, you don't go to the police because they're not going to help you. You go to a private security company and you pay them for the private security. And in fact, that was the biggest growth sector. A lot of white guys went into setting up private security companies and have done quite well. They run those private security companies and they make quite a lot of money. Except, as I say now, you've got to give your profits to black guys anyway. But it means there's no law and order. And if there's no law and order, it's like the catastrophe of South Africa is just like living in a state of permanent anarchy. And there's nothing worse than anarchy. Anybody who's lived in a state which breaks down because there's anarchy will tell you anarchy is the worst state for human beings because anarchy means you can die at any time. You can get in your car and be going to work and you can get killed on the way to work because there's no police there to stop anything bad happening. You can get killed at work. You can get killed in your home. And so it's a completely lawless society. And that also means you get this corruption. Everybody's corrupt. Everybody in the damn country, and not just black people, white people are corrupt now as well. Because that's what you behave like. There's no law. It's like it's wild. It's like the Wild West, in which you just do whatever it takes for your family to be okay. You make money however you can. To hell with morality. To hell with law. To hell with nice guy. Just do whatever it takes. People steal. There's no traffic lights because people steal the traffic lights. They actually rip the traffic lights out of the ground to sell it as scrap metal. There's no railway lines because they ripped up the railway lines to sell the railway lines as scrap metal. All the scrap metal was being exported to China, by the way. So South Africa's exported its railway system. They ripped up the rails. They ripped up the copper cabling to get the electricity into the trains. They've ripped up the copper cabling to get electricity to your house. They're now ripping up the pipes to bring water to your house. And all this stuff has been exported to China. I mean, it's truly chaotic and anarchistic. It's a country that's broken down completely. That's where you got to know.
Yeah, advocates of diversity, equity, inclusion, and those sorts of programs would do well to heed the warning that you're giving right now, and to try to really imagine the picture that you're painting here. Well, it doesn't need to be imagined. You can go online, look up photos and videos, and
Yep.
it's all right there. But nonetheless, try and envision the conclusions of these policies, what they
Okay.
advocate for today in terms of making the workforce more diverse, trying to get more women
Yep.
into STEM, trying to get more minorities into various fields or into government. In Australia, we were trying to set up the Voice to Parliament, which was a artificial sort of body created to be an ethnic Aboriginal lobby within our government, more or less. And we see time and time and time again the same result emerge. And South Africa is just really an extreme example where everything has just been heightened because it's on such a large scale with so few protections. Unlike in Australia, where we are still a majority white country, the workforce is still very highly trained and still is comprised of intelligent people. And people are still fairly, uh, they're getting along fairly well still pretty harmonious. But that can all change so quickly as a result of the policies we're currently pursuing, such as mass migration, such as the devaluing of white culture and white interests within Australia, and across the rest of the Western world. So you've told us a bit about the consequences, Professor, but could you? I read a little bit about from your book about the evolution of Afrikaner identity, and one particular chapter which was about the formation of Orania, Orania is a small town which has captured the imagination of nationalists across the Western world because it has posed a surprisingly successful solution to the problems of the government being taken over by hostile uh, people, basically, people that wish to see the extinction of our ethnic group. And yet, Oranias does manage to maintain its stance in opposition to this government, despite its relative lack of power, relative lack of wealth, population, despite every disadvantage. It is really making things work out in that small town for the Afrikaner people that live there. Could you tell us a little bit about this project and whether you think that this is a workable solution to the problems of multiracialism? And I suppose, second to that, could it be replicated in other Western countries around the world who are also battling with the same problems as South Africa, only on a longer timeline?
Okay. Okay. So Arania is actually a project that's been going on for quite a long time, but it's it's kind of catching on now, if you like. So Arania began. Okay, you actually have to go back to the apartheid era. So I explained to you that apartheid was trying to break the country up into 11 separate ethnic states, and that at a certain point, the National Party concluded that they couldn't do it anymore. It's a long story that we won't go into now, but they decided they needed to reform apartheid because you could no longer break the country up into these separate states for a whole bunch of reasons. One of which was that the Americans weren't going to allow them to do it. Okay, so they decide we have to reform apartheid, and this is when they brought in this idea of a consociational democracy, which is the kind of Switzerland canton type system. Okay. Okay. Now, when they announced that they were going to try and do that, the National Party split into a right wing and a left wing, and the right wing guys went, "No, we're not happy with this. We want to carry on trying to do apartheid. We don't think we should give up on this idea. It's a bad idea. We don't like your reformed apartheid idea." And there was a guy, it was a Professor Boshoff, I think was his name, who gathered around him a whole bunch of people and said, the government is selling us out. The current government is selling us out. If they pursue this reformed apartheid agenda that they have, we're going to end up with a black rule government, which of course is exactly what happened. So it turned out he was right. And they then, okay, there was a fight within the National Party. The right wing guys lost the fight. And they left the National Party. They split away and they formed the Conservative Party in South Africa. Um, and they continued to say, we still want to try and do this apartheid thing. We want to try and break the country down into separate ethnic nations. But of course, it never happened because they were being blocked for a whole bunch of reasons by lots and lots of different people. At that point, this guy, Professor Boshoff, said to the guys who were following him, he said, okay, let's try something else then. Let's go and we'll create our own town, basically. And so they bought a town. Um, it's in the desert. Okay, so he said, let's find a part of South Africa that nobody else wants. They're not going to fight us for it. They're not going to hassle us for it. Okay, if we try and get a nice bit of South Africa, black guys are going to come and say, no, 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 sorry, you can't have that. So they went to the Karoo. In Australian terms, it would be a little bit like, the back of Burke. Okay, the really, really dry interior, far western New South Wales. So it's dry. It's desert, and has a very low population, and it doesn't have a black population. There's no black people there. And so he went, well, let's go. And it was actually an irrigation scheme that the government had set up, and the government had built these huge dams which would store the water for the irrigation scheme. And in one of these huge dams that they had built, they had built a small town to house all the people that had built the dam, the engineers and the dam workers and all the guys that had worked building this dam over about a 5 or 6 year period. And then, because when the dam was built, they didn't need the town anymore, so it was just abandoned. It was like this, there was an empty town there. But this town technically still belonged to the government. There was an empty town belonging to the Department of Water Affairs. And so the Iranian movement went to them and said, "We'd like to buy this town from you. We'll buy this empty, it's a ghost town. We'll buy this ghost town from you." Okay, so they buy the ghost town and they turn it into Irania as their own town, and they start to allow white Afrikaners to settle there. And you have to go through, you apply to the Irania committee to ask if you can buy a property there. It's you buy a share in Irania, and then you can build your house there. And the only condition is to work in Irania, you're only allowed to move there if you agree that you will do all your own work. You're not going to employ black people. Okay. The Iranian movement said the problem with white South Africans is you guys want to have black servants. You want black guys to do all the crappy work. You want black guys to clean your toilets. No, do it yourself. We live in a white town. We do all the bad things for ourselves as well. So we don't have to have black people. We can always be a white majority in our own town. That was the model, and that's the model they've adopted. So it's like, um, it's they, they call it doing it for yourself. Be responsible for everything that you do yourself, from the best job in the town to the worst job in the town. We do everything. Um, and that has been the Iranian model, and they slowly built it up. So they started with this horrible little town in the middle of the desert, and they have set up irrigation schemes so they grow their own food. They have set up solar panels so they generate their own electricity. In fact, they have electricity and the other parts of South Africa don't. It's quite ironic that. They set up their own economy, etc. And they've slowly got it to work. Um, Now, okay, the problem with the Arania project is that it is in a desert. I mean, that still remains a problem. There is a limit to the amount of. There's no obvious economy there, if I can put it to you that way. There's no minerals to mine. Yes, you can grow. They are growing. They're growing their own food, but I think there's a limit to the size that Irania can become, and they haven't yet found a way to solve that problem. But they are negotiating. They kind of want more land to try and do this, and so the model is it's an interesting model. And what it also goes together with a model they called a Buddha state. They want their own Afrikaner state where we Afrikaners will live together with our own people. We'll do everything for ourselves, and that'll be our state. We won't let anybody else in. Okay. Oh, because the other thing you have to be so. First of all, you have to agree to do all your own work. Secondly, you have to be you have to speak Afrikaans because it's an Afrikaner state. And thirdly, you have to be a Christian. Those are the three conditions. If you're a Christian, speak Afrikaans, prepare to do all your own work, then you're in. Okay. Um, but as I say, the area that they happen to be in, um, it's not. I don't know how it's going to be economically sustainable to make it any bigger than it is. Um, so Boshoff said, let's go to a part of the country that nobody else wants. If they don't want it, they leave us alone. And there's truth in that. It's logical. It's a smart idea. But the problem is there's no how do you build an economy beyond a certain size? You can never go much beyond where they are now, I don't think, unless they can think of something that I haven't thought of. So there's your limitation. Um, there is another project in the country, another alternative to the ANC, which is it's called the Western Cape gets its own independence. So the one part of the country, there's only one province, or if you like, a state. In South Africa, they call states provinces. There is only one province in South Africa where blacks are not a majority. Blacks are a majority in every state in the country except for the Western Cape. And so the argument is okay, there are people inside the Western Cape saying, we want to be independent. We want to, it's like a Brexit. We want to break away from South Africa and form our own state. And it'll be a Western state. Now, the Western Cape project is not going to be a white state. It's going to be a state where white people and coloreds are the majority, but blacks will not be in the majority. Now, coloreds also speak Afrikaans. So it will be a racially mixed state. So, not from a nationalist point of view, not ideal, but at least it will not be an ANC rule state. It will be a Western state. It will be a Christian state. It'll be basically Western, and the economy will continue to function because white guys will make it function. So there's two projects. There's the Irania project, and there's the Irania project, and then there's the Western Cape project, and they might even overlap to some extent. You could see a way whereby you could mix them in some way. But so there are people who are trying to think of other ways of dealing with the ANC problem.
Thank you for joining us this week, Eric. It was very interesting. I'm sure the audience will like what you said, or will be at least interested in what you said. I think you spoke coherently from what I heard, despite my shoddy internet connection. So thank you for joining us. I hope you have a great rest of your week. And would you like to just tell us where people can find more of your work while you close out?
Um, Gosh, where can they find my work? I've published lots of stuff. Uh, Amazon, most of it's on Amazon.